Welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds. I'm your host, Chuck Warren. Sam Stone is out handling a crisis at the office this morning. In studio with me is Brendan Evans. And our first guest, repeat offender, Chuck Flint. Chuck is the former chief of staff for Marsha Blackburn, former vice president of strategic relationships at Breitbart, and he is the CEO for Alliance for IRS Accountability. Chuck, welcome to the show again.
Great to be back.
By the way, is there anything that's least surprising that when Morocco lost, they're just causing mayhem in all these European countries?
I saw that, and it's just right on par. I mean, it's what you'd expect, and it's really sad. It's a sad indictment, but it just goes to show you have to protect your borders. You got to protect them.
Yeah, it just they need to really, look, the problem with this debate is they try to make it a racial thing. Assimilation is a big deal to go into a country. And if you're not willing to do it, then you should not be in that country. And what they're just doing over a soccer match, it's the same thing when the Knicks won. You had some people, but not quite to this extent. I mean, it's just total mayhem in London and France.
Well, I think about it this way. Imagine if you or I just decided, hey, we're going to go jump, the fence and go into this country and then expect them to give us free health care and social services. And we're not really going to bother to learn a whole lot about the country, but we're just going to live there and sort of do our own thing and sort of think we're entitled to be there. And that's exactly what they're doing. I mean, they're not showing any respect for the system. They trash the streets. They walk around like they own the place. And to your point, I mean, there's no assimilation, and there has to be, and there's nothing wrong with having that discussion. That's a discussion that is something that needs to be had. It's just in being intellectually honest.
I would bet $1,000 that to immigrate to a country, you did not get any welfare assistance. I would bet $1,000 if that was a uniform principle, that no one from the Middle East would be immigrating to these countries, and the only country that would see people still trying to immigrate into it's the United States.
I would agree. I mean, I think that's spot on.
Yeah. All right, look, we're talking about you wrote 3 great pieces recently, which we just loved. The first one is you did in the Washington Examiner about New York just elected price controls, basically. And, it's gone socialist. This mayor thinks I think he thinks he's the world leader on socialism, frankly. But that being said, explain to our audience the premise of your article, exactly what is a price control and what is Mamdani trying to do with price controls?
Price controls are government intervention. The government comes in and they essentially set a floor on what you can charge. I'll give you an example. The new rent freeze in New York City, right? Okay, so certain units there, the landlords can only charge a certain amount. And that's, supposed to be done in order to make life more affordable for New Yorkers that are renting, saying, okay, well, they can't raise the rent. We're going to keep it down for you. But it's not really an intellectually honest approach because they're not telling the whole story. The rest of that story is that for the units that don't have rent controls, the landlords have to charge those other people higher costs, like they have to charge them higher rent. So what you're just doing is you're shifting costs. You're shifting the costs to other people that probably are in the same building. And people have been tweeting about this in New York City saying, I live in a rent-controlled building. The person in the unit next to me has a rent-controlled unit. I don't. The landlords are going to have to charge more. Or what they'll do is they just won't even rent a unit out because it's not worth the cost of having to do all the renovations to bring it up to code and then rent it to somebody, especially if it's in a rent frozen area or a unit. They only get a certain amount, but that's essentially it, right? Government sets the price. If you have a government-run grocery store like Mamdani wants to do, he was talking to the bodega owners. How much do you all charge for certain items? Because the government has no idea what it's doing in this area. They shouldn't be in the business of doing business, and they just have no idea because they don't really respond to supply and demand the way a free market does. They just set prices They have quotas, and that's it. It's why the Soviet Union crumbled.
Well, going back to the price controls of apartments, we had a gentleman that's a good friend of the show, Adam Dreschner, used to be in New York, was a hedge fund guy, and he wrote a piece, and there's 50,000 empty units in New York alone because they're price control, but people had been in them 30 years and they need major updates. And if you're a landlord and you're figuring, I need to do a $150,000 update to this to make it livable, you're not going to do it if you're price control because you don't get your money back. So it's easier for them just to keep it empty.
It is. And here's another interesting, question, given Mamdani's politics and the politics of the DSA candidates, the Democratic Socialists of America candidates. They are moving more towards really a communist system.
Yes.
In communism, you seize the means of production. There are people that are DSA-backed candidates, one in Oregon, who doesn't think that there should even be private property, that the government should control all the housing. So at what point are they going to start slapping these landlords by saying, you know what, you haven't made the necessary renovations to the units that are where the rents are frozen? And basically, they're just going to say, you're out of compliance, and you know what, we're going to take the property. And I think that's the next step. Like, this is all going to be a pretext to get to the end of what they want to do, which is to go ahead and seize it and make all of these units and these buildings into government-run housing, because,
Right.
quote unquote, we're going to make life more affordable for everybody. The government will take care of it.
You also mentioned in your article about the Obamacare pricing. Would you
Yes.
explain to our audience about, we were promised this, this pot of gold on Obamacare, and the prices have just exploded. Explain to our audience what was promised and what has happened with Obamacare.
What was promised is that Obamacare would be a cost control measure, that your prices would not go up, the government would control it, you wouldn't lose access. And what has happened is the premiums skyrocketed. They went up 129% between 2013 and 2019. Just in the last year, they've gone up 26%. So the experiment has not worked. Government has not been able to control the price because, once again, it's a market issue. It's about supply, it's about demand. Yet you're also working with insurance companies here. So these government-run exchanges have honestly been a complete failure. And once again, it just shows that price controls do not work because the government isn't built, and I've worked in government, they are just not built to respond to a market type of system that does work. In a free market, if you don't put out a good product, the consumer lets you know right away.
Correct.
And that's a big point, because if you're a government bureaucrat, you're insulated from that type of criticism. I mean, if you're a consumer and you're dealing with the government, let's say at a government-run grocery store, and maybe they order too many avocados, and they're not going to order anymore, and half of them are rotten, and you go up there and you're like, oh, this food's bad. At a regular store, they'd be completely embarrassed and they'd say, we'll give you your money back, and they probably let you shop for free. At a government-run grocery store, you're going to call a hotline probably, and you'll be lucky if you get somebody that answers.
What do you think we need to do to squash this lurch towards socialism? What needs to happen?
I think that we need to look at these people that are running. So Mamdani, Kairos in Denver, you've got a couple others. They're sitting here selling this lie that the system is rigged, that you're oppressed, yada, yada, yada. Meanwhile, Mamdani became a citizen 8 years ago, and he's now the mayor of the largest city in the country. You've got Kairos in Denver, whose family immigrated here from Ethiopia when she was 11 years old. She became an attorney at Sidley Austin, and then now she's a candidate for Congress and just won a Democratic primary. So I would like them to just name one rule, name one thing that has existed that has held them down, and that is this oppressive system that they keep talking about, because it's just selling. It's the rhetoric and the reality do not match. And that, to me, is the biggest thing that people need to be pointing out when they talk about this type of a system. And you're struggling and it's rigged. Give me one example of how it's rigged, Zohran Mamdani. How were you held back? Just one. I'm going to wait for it. I just want to hear it. Give me one example.
Well, and then also, for example, that seems like something that would be a good cause for American for Prosperity, to do a nationwide education campaign of the failures of socialism. We really have to go and start re-educating people because they're not getting into public school. It's a real problem. And I also understand, look, when you have young people under 30 having a hard time buying a home, right? Student loans, that's where this leads to. It's like, I need help. What would you suggest we tell them or do or show that that is not the path forward?
Well, look, I love what you're saying because I completely agree with you. You have to talk to these people. We can't insult them. We can't just, and it's not good enough to just say communism is bad, capitalism is great. These people have, these students, these young adults, they've been programmed in colleges and in high schools by liberal professors that have essentially just brainwashed them in their formative years. And they need to be educated further, to your point, about why this system doesn't work. Not just that it doesn't work, but why it doesn't work, which is the discussion that we're having right now. That is really important. I think it's the most important part of this.
Yeah, and it's something they could do, actually, donors could do with C3 money. We just need an education campaign. Maybe it's something as well you do a plebiscite in various states saying we reject socialism here in the state of Arizona, state of Florida, state of Tennessee. Maybe you just start bringing it to forehead and you start really educating people on it and squash it.
Exactly, and I think also you've got to attack the messengers here
Yes.
that are spreading this. These people are not credible. They are selling intellectually dishonest arguments, and they know it, and they're doing it in order to get these people to rise up. They know that they're upset, and they're taking advantage of them.
Yes. Folks, we're with Chuck Flint. He is the former vice president of strategic relations at Breitbart News. He is currently CEO for the Alliance for IRS Accountability. And you can follow him on X at Chuck A. Flint. Chuck, 30 seconds left here. What other articles do you have coming out here in the future that people can know about?
Going to do more on unrealized gains. That
Oh,
is
good.
is a huge issue that we're following. I saw Jonathan Turley wrote something about it the other
Yeah.
day. They want to plus up the IRS with $100 billion of money for enforcement, and it's not just to go after the rich. They claim it's a
Right.
billionaire's tax. It's going to be to go after everyone. That is
Exactly.
something that should scare every American.
Folks, with Chuck Flint, we're going to be right back to carry on our conversation about ICE and all other types of fun things. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds. We're going to continue our conversation of Chuck Flint. You can find Chuck on X at Chuck A. Flint. All right, you wrote a great piece for Fox News. Secret signal chats reveal how anti-ICE agitators coordinated Newark riots. Explain to people what's going on in Newark, what ICE is doing, and what the agitators are doing.
Oh, just really quick to clarify too, that was an interview actually that
Okay.
Osram Namani at Fox, she's a great reporter, wrote the piece, but interviewed me at length about it
Great.
because of my background as a prosecutor. Um, so what's going on is that these groups, these protest groups that they've got that protest ICE everywhere, there's a lot of coordination that's going on, and there's a lot of money that's being pumped into this. 278 million. There were over 100 different groups that were involved in the ICE, we'll call them riots, that were
Right.
going on in Newark with the Delaney Hall 100. And it's really very structured. I mean, encrypted signal chats that they use. They've got protective gear that cost, I mean, just so much money. You're talking about masks. You're talking about protective gear that they wear on their body, and it's all done to go ahead and engage in subversive activity to get in the streets and to give the cops a hard time. And it's really very troubling. And a lot of the money too, we can trace back to Neville Roy Singham, who is a former American tech tycoon who lives in Shanghai, China now, and they believe he's coordinating with the Chinese Communist Party.
How can we stop this? I mean, this is purely sedition in our country.
It,
It's
it,
treasonous what they're doing. How do we stop it?
I'll tell you what I think needs to happen. Listen, these politicians that are out there need to responsibly talk about law enforcement, and all of this talk about abolishing ICE, abolishing even law enforcement. I mean, this is crazy. I'm just going to say this is crazy talk. And I'm a former prosecutor. You have to have law enforcement in this country. Now, do they do a perfect job all the time? No, but they do a darn good job.
Right.
And I'll tell you what, with ICE, it's different though. They 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 don't want to control the border. Trump got in. Now all of a sudden we don't have border crossings, right? I mean, we didn't have to have a new law. We just started enforcing the law. But what the Democrats want to do is they really want to abolish ICE. Because if they abolish all the interior enforcement, there's no way to keep track of who's here. And by the way, there are a lot of bad people that are here. You know, we always hear these stories about, well, you know, there so many of these people are just good people and they do this and they do that. I'm sure there's some good people here, but there are a lot of bad people here. And when they do bad things that hurt American citizens, there's not one excuse for it, not one.
No.
And so when I hear these politicians talking about it, you know, none of them have ever met with an angel family. I've met with angel families, okay, and I know one pretty well. And you hear one of their stories, that'll change your perspective real quick.
Chuck, I'm going to throw you a curveball here. How long were you a prosecutor for?
2.5 years in Florida. And, you know, when I was there, I tried everything from second-degree murder to simple drug possession. And I tried a lot of felony cases. I was in a special victims unit trying
Oh,
child
wow.
crimes. And
Oh,
so, you know, I got a lot of great experience. And, you know, it was honestly the job that I've enjoyed the most. I mean, it was a great job. I loved it. And, you know, maybe I'll go back to doing it someday.
so this is my curveball for you. We have the Charlie Kirk trial starting, or preliminary hearings in Utah. Tell our audience a little bit what's going through the prosecutor's mind and what they're having to do to prepare for this, because it's so
Sure.
conspiratorial.
Well, I did an interview this morning on this exact issue for Newsmax. So I'm glad
Oh,
you're
great.
asking about it. It's good timing. So right now they're in the preliminary hearing, and at the preliminary hearing, all you're looking for is to establish that there's enough evidence to show that there's probable cause that he committed the crime, so that you can go to trial. They've got plenty of evidence to show that there's going to be a trial. This is going to be a long, long process because death is on the table. He's going to
Yes.
get the death penalty, most likely. And the prosecution is not going to make a plea offer. So, because of that, the defense is going to challenge every single thing. And what is just as, it's not as important as a conviction, but it's pretty darn close, is protecting the record to make sure that this case is not overturned on appeal. And this is the point I was making on Newsmax this morning. The defense will challenge everything. The judge at times is going to seem like he's bending over backwards to work with the defense. What he's really doing is making sure that no issues come up on appeal to overturn this case. They don't want to try it again.
Right.
So he's not ruling on this preliminary hearing until September, when we all know right now, I mean, there's plenty of evidence to go to trial. He's having them submit memos. So that way, when an appellate court looks back on this, they can say the defense was treated fairly. Because I'll tell you what, when Tyler Robinson is convicted, and he's going to get the death penalty, you know, absent some type of incredible malfunction, he will spend every day for the rest of his life thinking of how he can get out of jail, what he can appeal. He's going to argue ineffective assistance of counsel as well. Everything will be on the table. And the prosecutors know that, so that, you know, they don't need to be performative. They need to dot I's and cross T's, try a professional case, and just convict him. It's going to be a war of attrition. I did not try a case of this scale, but I tried a case in Florida where it was an armed home invasion. The defendant was going to get life. We had great evidence. He was a very violent man. I never made him a plea offer. And the defense, we went through multiple pretrial motions to exclude evidence. They did everything they could to challenge every piece of evidence introduced at trial. It was a long, long process, but he was convicted. So that's what they're going to go through.
I'm going to follow up with that. So I am a huge believer in capital punishment. I have a list. As a matter of fact, everybody at my office sort of laughs at me. You know, I'm sort of like the guy in Parks and Recreation from Venezuela. But I think sometimes, and I've had this conversation, is even as adamant as I am about capital punishment being used. You know, people say it takes too long. It's someone's life on the mind, and we have 2 minutes left here. But it's someone's life on the mind, and they deserve every chance to plead their case. Would you? I mean, tell me where I'm wrong on that, or explain to our audience why this is important. That defense has this much leeway to protect a life.
Well, because taking life, taking liberty from somebody, I mean, that's the ultimate punishment in
Right.
society. It's always going to be this way in a death case. The defense attorneys look at it this way. A win for them in a case like this is not that the defendant isn't convicted, it's that the death penalty doesn't get administered. And so they do everything they can to challenge it. They do everything on constitutional grounds, too. They'll say it's cruel and inhumane punishment. I personally think the death penalty is not only a deterrent, but I also think that it's justice for families that have their loved ones killed, in this case, assassinated.
I agree. We're not going to be able to get into the supply chain. We'll have you back on about that next time. But with a minute left here, do we need to bring on more courts to handle the backload of justice? Do we need to go to have more appeal courts? Do we need more district courts?
I don't think so. In my experience, the biggest impediment to cases moving along are judges. Judges not being able to control their dockets. And that's not the death cases that they're trying necessarily. It's all the other cases that they have where they just they won't make a decision. Some of them are very good, but if you can't move your docket and make a decision, it gets backlogged so quickly. And believe me, not only the prosecutors, but also the defense attorneys don't like it. Nobody likes it.
I'm sure.
And I've had judges that move dockets quick, and I've had judges that move them at a snail's pace. And when they move at a snail's pace, boy, it just you know it, and it's a tough room to operate in.
Chuck Flint, thanks a million, folks. You can follow Chuck at Chuck A. Flint on X. This is Breaking Battlegrounds. We'll be right back.
Mystery, secrets untold. The truth gets set free when B gets a hold. Crimes where killers roam off free, or even ones where they get caught at the scene. From cold case files to headline news, she's breaking it all down just for you. So come take a seat, don't miss a beat. These crime corners where the stories go deep.
Well, folks, we have B's Corner. B, what do we got this week?
Okay, so today's story is on Chalino Sánchez. It starts where he was born in Sinaloa, Mexico.
Okay.
And very deep and interesting story, actually. It revolves music, so I had to go with it because I have to stick to my music niche sometimes. I couldn't help myself. So Chalino lived in Mexico. When he was young, his sister got raped by a local man, and he killed the man. So he already had this reputation as an outlaw. There wasn't any police records on it, but there's talk about it through his family. And later down the road, he started to do music, but he had a lot of issues and ties with the cartel that were causing him problems in his day-to-day life. So he wrote music that was called corridos. I probably just butchered that, my apologies. But he wrote these songs, and they're stories about his life in Mexico and the cartel. And back in that time, in like the 1970s is when this was, the cartel would use musicians to write songs about them to kind of make them seem cool and
Sort of like dictators do in other countries.
Exactly. And so Chalino didn't write songs like that. He wrote songs about his own personal experiences.
Interesting.
So he ended up going to the U.S. He was making these cassette tapes. He was put in jail for a little bit in the U.S. for just like a minor infraction. He started really writing in jail. And when he came out, he started releasing these cassettes, and they got very popular very quick. So the cartel started getting on him because he wasn't writing these songs. And there's a lot of theories about if it was his sister dying and him killing them, or his sister getting raped and him killing that man, if it was revenge. But there's this viral video that comes back to my whole point of this story, where he's handed this note on stage, and back in the 1980s when he was performing, these notes were just song requests, but when he got this note, you can see his whole entire mannerism just change. Like he froze, looked up, and there's a lot of theory on if the note said, "If you keep singing, we're gonna kill you." and he kept singing.
All because he's not doing cartel love letters.
Yep. And so before this incident, though, that was back when he went back to Sinaloa to perform, and people told him, don't go back there, don't do it, because he already had an incident in Coachella, California, not the festival, but like a little pub near Coachella, where he was performing, and a man got up on stage and shot at him and hit him twice.
Really?
And he fired back in self-defense.
So he's carrying a gun on stage.
Yep. I had a little revolver in his waistband because he was paranoid too. And I mean, the life he lived, I think the paranoia was rightful.
Right.
But shot this man back, missed him, ended up killing a 20-year-old gentleman in the audience. They did not, Chalino didn't get in trouble for it because they let it be self-defense. But then this other man went to prison. He actually was released in 2023 for attempting to kill Chalino. And then...
What year was this that he attempted to kill him?
This was the 1980s at this point, like 1983.
So he just got out.
Mm-hmm. He just got out. And Chalino ended up being really paranoid. So he gets this show in Sinaloa, as I said, and they were telling him, don't go, don't do it. Do not do this. And he was already paranoid himself. I mean, you're carrying a revolver on stage. Yeah. Most people carry extra guitar picks,
Right.
And he ends up getting this note in Sinaloa when he performed. It's a viral video, so I'm sure some of you guys have seen it. If you haven't, watch it. You can see the expression change and make your own theories. He gets this note. After the show, when he kept on singing, he was with his cousins, his brothers, and a bunch of girls driving. And they got pulled over by these men that were posing as state police.
Correct.
And they told him, our boss wants to talk to you. And he was like, okay. And that was the last time he was ever seen alive. The next day, it was, I believe, in May 1992, May 15th, 1992. He was found near the Mexico 15 highway with his wrist tied behind his back, his eyes covered with a piece of cloth, and 2 gunshot wounds to the back of the head. And what sucks about this story is he sold all of his music rights before going to Sinaloa out of paranoia to buy his family a house in America, and he did that. But when he died, his music got wildly popular because he was a great musician.
And so we got a minute there. So they're living off the royalties?
They don't get any of the royalties since he sold away his rights out of paranoia.
How much did he sell them for?
I don't know. They didn't have details.
And this is all because he would not do songs praising the cartel.
Yeah, I talked to Jadir about this too in our office, and his grandmother knew him.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah, very crazy.
Well, that's a weird story. We'll post some articles about it on social media so you folks can follow up more for it.
Yeah, I'll get the video on there too.
Yeah, get the video on it as well. All right, folks, this is Breaking Battlegrounds. We're going to come back here for our next segment. We're going to talk to Matt Beinberg. He is with the Goldwater Institute about the school choice initiative here in Arizona. Follow us at breakingbattlegrounds.vote or wherever you listen to your podcast. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds. Our next guest is Matt Beinberg. He is with the Goldwater Institute, and he is the Director of Education Policy there. You can follow him on X at MBEIENBURG. Again, you can follow him on X at MBEIENBURG. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, so first of all, the teachers' unions have put 400,000 signatures to disrupt the ESA system we have in Arizona. Explain to our audience what they're trying to accomplish, and then explain to our audience why we have to go put on the ballot a constitutional amendment to protect military families.
Sure, yeah. So the teachers' unions and some far-left activists are trying to rip down the state school choice program, the ESA Empowerment Scholarship Account, which I think folks are familiar with, but essentially it gives funds to families, deposits into an account for those kids, and they can use it for private school, they can use it for at-home education, special education therapy, really whatever is going to best serve the need of that kid. So that's a program that serves 100,000 Arizona students today. And the teachers' unions have been trying to rip that down for years, and they went and brought $4 million of out-of-state dollars, poured it in, bought up signature gatherers, and went around and collected petition signatures to try to create a ballot measure that's going to essentially try to dismantle this program. And so they've been running that around saying, hey, we're just trying to improve the program. We're trying to put common sense guardrails on there. We're trying to stop misspending. And buried in there are provisions that say, for instance, we're going to throw every kid off that program if their family income, combined income, is $150,000 or more. That means if you have two teachers at the Phoenix Union High School district, where the average teacher pays over $75,000 a year, two public school teachers, they would suddenly be told, yeah, your kids don't even qualify for this, or a nurse and a firefighter. So they're essentially going to go and throw off tens of thousands of kids from this program. They're also going to go in there and every single year, any dollar that is in one of those kids' scholarship accounts, because they're able to save that each year and put it toward, high school or even college, they're going to go in there every single year and take every penny from those accounts. They're essentially raiding these student scholarship accounts, taking it away from them, and just taking those funds, even though those were actually already promised to those kids in the past. So a whole bunch of other provisions tucked in there as well to go after private schools, to add a bunch of government regulation, really just an appalling measure all around. And yet they have, again, just through brute force, bought up all of these signatures. So they've submitted these. If they turn out to be valid, which is now in process of being checked, if those turn out to be valid, their measure would go on the ballot in November. And if it gets passed, it becomes voter protected, in which case essentially the legislature can't even go in and fix that down the road. So
which means you'd have which means you'd have to do another initiative to overturn it.
That's right. Yep.
Explain to our audience how big of a success Arizona's ESAs have been.
Yeah, they were the program was originally created back in 2012, just a few hundred students. And then, as I mentioned, it got expanded in 2022 under Governor Ducey, then Speaker of the House Ben Toma, got it expanded to be open to any kid. And there are over 100,000 students who are serving it. There are thousands of kids in the special needs programs for it. There's about 1,000 kids who are on it, whose parents are serving or were killed in line of duty in the U.S. military. You got kids from the Indian reservations, from failing schools. And so we have seen tens of thousands of kids who, just in the last few years, were in public schools. And as soon as they were given this financial opportunity and said, hey, we actually, instead of taxpayers spending money on your public school education, we'll give you, it's even actually less, it costs taxpayers less, but we'll give you those dollars and we'll make private education financially affordable for your family. And we've seen tens of thousands of families take them up on that offer because those families recognize, hey, I can get a superior education for my kid through one of these alternate means, and the unions want to break that down.
And all this money to collect the signatures primarily came from out of state, correct? So it's not even Arizona constituents funding this. This is out of state union money.
That's right. Yeah, they're trying to say this is some organic grassroots, teacher parent led initiative, which is nonsense. I mean, you can look at it, and the National Education Association, these out of state groups, just essentially again trying to buy up an election through this from out of state dollars.
So Representative Michael Way, out in Queen Creek, has propose, and you put it on the ballot, a constitutional amendment that will protect military families. Explain to our audience why this is important and what does this do to counter the teachers union money grab.
Yeah, so this is an incredible measure. It's called the Military Families College Savings and Scholarship Protection Act, or Military Families Protection Act. Very straightforward measure. It says this would be an amendment to the state constitution, so this will also go to voters in November. This has already been referred by the legislature. This will appear on the ballot. Very simple, very straightforward. It says this state will not confiscate scholarship dollars from the accounts of children of military families. So again, if these are kids whose moms and dads are or were serving on active duty in the U.S. military or were killed in the line of duty. So the amendment says this state will not confiscate scholarship dollars from these kids. It's not about giving them additional funds. It's not about increasing spending. It just literally says we will not renege on our promises and go in and seize and take away these dollars that have been given to these kids for their education. And if any bill or ballot measure violates that bill or ballot measure is struck down. So it's very clear. It says this doesn't affect any measure whatsoever unless it does this one completely unpardonable act of literally confiscating scholarship dollars from military families. And if you do that, your measure is thrown out. So the teachers unions are upset because they recognize that their measure, that again, they call it the Protect Education Act, their anti-school choice measure that we just talked about, actually goes in there. And as I said, it raids the scholarship dollars of every kid, including the military families. And so their measure would run afoul of the Military Protection Act, and their measure would be struck down.
Is there amendment, is their initiative statutory or constitutional?
It's statutory. That's a great question. So if they both pass, the Military Family Protection Act is a constitutional measure. It trumps the other one. So it doesn't matter what they put in theirs. Theirs is statutory. And if they both pass, the Constitution trumps it. And so the Military, again, Protection Act says very clearly, if you do this one thing, if you confiscate dollars from military kids, your act is gone. And so they recognize, and they don't like to sort of acknowledge this. They're complaining and crying that the Military Protection Act is going to strike theirs down, and they don't like to admit the reason why. The only reason it does is because they smuggled these provisions into their ballot measure to confiscate the dollars of military families.
So I'm going to let you play civic teacher for a minute for our audience. Why would constitutional trump a statutory initiative?
Yeah, it's a great question. So just like the United States Constitution, and I think a lot of folks maybe not even recognize, we actually have every state has a state constitution. And just like the U.S. Constitution, right, that's the bedrock, the framework. You can't pass a law that violates the U.S. Constitution, right? If you want to change something, you have to do an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. If the Constitution says you have the right to free speech, you can't just go pass a law that says actually you don't, right? That's unconstitutional. That would get struck down. And it works the same way with the state constitution. The state constitution is supreme over any kind of just generic law or statute. So if they want to pass a law, that's fine, but it can never clash with the Constitution. And since the Military Protection Act would be a state constitutional amendment, that would be enshrined in the Arizona state constitution, that would simply supersede any kind of statute or law that they're trying to pass otherwise. And so again, that's where they recognize that when this military measure gets passed by voters, it will strike down any conflicting measure such as theirs.
So for our Arizona audience, what other education measures are on the ballot this election?
So there's one, and the numbering on these will change, but there's a measure that was passed, HCR 2040, and it essentially says we're not going to have school districts expending taxpayer resources in support of teachers' unions. So you can't deduct money from teachers' paychecks to go to union dues. You can't use school resources to advance union operations. You can't have the teachers' unions be given this exclusive bargaining right where then teachers can't, essentially negotiate their own contracts outside of the union. A very, very robust protection, very common sense. Again, doesn't prohibit a union from existing or operating, but it says this state is not going to essentially subsidize your operations on school property and with school resources, and we're not going to give you special privileges where you get to lock out, other parties from being able to try to negotiate. So that's a hugely important. The unions are really terrified of that because they recognize that that's also a threat to their control. Again, the teachers' unions are all about power and control. This measure would strip that. And then one other that's also worth chatting about very briefly, we got this passed, HCR 2044. This is an anti-DEI measure. This would say under no circumstance can our state, this includes public universities, school districts, under no state can you discriminate on the basis of race. You can't do affirmative action, DEI, whatever you want to call it. You can't force kids to take a DEI class to graduate. You can't force faculty into these DEI trainings. You can't operate one of these DEI offices. Shuts down all that race-based nonsense that we've seen for years. Again, puts that in the Arizona state constitution. It says we're not going to have our programs and our state practices different and racialized, to divide Arizonans based on the color of their skin. So that's another massive opportunity that's going to be going to the ballot. It was already referred by the legislature. Speaker Steve Montenegro was the sponsor of that, and that'll be going to the ballot in November for Arizonans to vote on as well. So hugely important as well.
So explain this to our audience. It seems like you have those, and let's say they're passed, especially let's say DEI. The attorney general has to make sure these are being complied to, correct? How will we go and supervise to make sure this isn't happening in schools? What is the punishment if they do?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So usually in constitutional language, it doesn't spell out all of the particulars, and essentially what this would do. For instance, we actually have a lawsuit at the Goldwater Institute against Arizona State University because there is existing law that says you can't have one of these diversity, equity, inclusion trainings, and they actually force that on the faculty. So we're actually representing a member of the faculty right now, and so that's the Goldwater Institute coming in and filing a suit on behalf of one of these aggrieved parties. So it's not simply the attorney general that would potentially be able to bring a suit. If you've got someone who's violating the state constitution, you have organizations like the Goldwater Institute that will step in and say, hey, we're going to defend your rights. This is a very clearly, obviously laid out right that you have under our state law or under our state constitution. We will defend that. And so by putting these safeguards in the state constitution, the protections for the military families, the protections for students and job applicants and contractors against DEI, this actually puts a massive protection. Obviously, we do need to have folks in government as well who should be doing their job, but these measures, even if you assume perhaps bad faith actions by some of the politicians, you actually do have opportunities for others to help enforce these measures.
We have 2 minutes left here, and I just had a policy idea. What if we pass legislation next session, and we'll have a Republican governor hopefully here, that whenever out-of-state money comes in for an initiative, that there's a 5% tax on it, and that 5% is used to notify the public that this money's coming from out of state to put this on the ballot.
That's certainly there've been a lot of kind of ideas trying to think through what are ways to let voters know, hey, this is not, as we were talking about, this isn't something organic, and there's already notifications that go on and say, hey, warning, if you pass one of these voter protected measures, it's not something that can be fixed
But
later
no one
very
reads them.
easily.
Yeah, no one reads them. So it seems like there has to be a mechanism where when you have something come in like this that's going to change something that's been passed, and it's $4 million, it seems like anything above 6 digits, that there should be able to go out a postcard or live calls to people saying this money just came in for the teachers unions to overturn ESAs, and it came from out of state, and this is who it came through. It seems like that would make these elections more fair. I mean, I'm not saying people can't do it because that's their First Amendment right, but people should also realize this money's not coming from Arizona; it's coming from unions in D.C.
Yeah. And interestingly, there are some disclosure requirements, not exactly as you said, but actually that they have to disclose on the political action committees that do these things. They actually have to disclose their out-of-state contributions.
Right.
And the
But no one reads
teachers
them.
union here,
No one reads them. I do these ads. No one reads them. It's just
right.
quick, like 13% came from out of state. Well, so what? I mean, who's even seeing that?
Yeah, that's right. But I was going to say, even the teachers unions here actually essentially falsely reported this. And they reported, instead of saying, well, yeah, 95% of our funding came from out of state, they said something like, well, it's 10%, because they said the number of funders. So they treat, if the NEA, one entity puts in 99% of the funds, they say, well, that was just one organization. We had 10 people give us $1 in state. So, we see them play games. But yeah, if there are other opportunities to put language in there to notify voters, whether it appears on the ballot itself or otherwise, again, a lot of solutions have been put forward and creative ideas to say, what can we do so that voters really, this is one of the problems when you have direct democracy rather than Republican government, that you have people who come in here, they try to sneak in a bunch of stuff. The voters, when they're being asked to sign a piece of paper, they're getting some 10-second pitch that doesn't really represent the measure anyway.
No,
I mean, I heard some of these signature gatherers describe it, and it had nothing to do with the actual contents of the measure. And the voters aren't sitting there poring over it like a legislator necessarily would. So yeah, for various reasons, having voters actually be aware of things like you said, of hey, this is essentially bankrolled, an out-of-state operation trying to buy up Arizona policy. That's the kind of thing that perhaps can provide some disclosure on that.
Well, folks, Matt, thank you for joining us. Folks, you can follow Matt at X at MBEIENBURG. Matt, anywhere else they can follow you?
GoldwaterInstitute.org has a lot of information on the measures we've been talking about, so appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Have a great day. Folks, this is Breaking Battlegrounds. Have a fantastic weekend.
Hi, kids.
Remember your dreams? All the future plans you made? Has private student loan debt destroyed those dreams? It doesn't have to. Why Refi refinances distressed or defaulted private student loans that others won't touch. They can reduce your payment, you can get your life back, and they don't even care what your credit score is. Don't let private student loan debt ruin your life. Call Why Refi today. Let's go!
Welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds. Of course, folks, as you know, you can always hear us on 960 AM The Patriot and on the Salem Radio Network. Our next guest here is Nick Dunn. He's the Vice President of Strategy and Senior Fellow at Sutherland Institute. Sutherland Institute is one of the gold standards of the think tank universe, and he's also, as VP of Strategy, he oversees execution of external impacts of Sutherland's written and multimedia policy content. Nick, welcome to the show.
Hi, good to be with you.
So you did a report and survey were done on empowerment accounts that would replace multiple federal assistance programs. Explain to our audience what programs they would replace and why empowerment accounts are a better idea.
Yeah, I think the first way to think about this is if you think about the way we as a country try to help people get out of poverty right now is very fragmented and disjointed, where there are over 80 programs or over 100 programs, depending on some estimates, well over $1 trillion a year. And these programs report up to different federal agencies. They go through different congressional committees. So it's just it's not a very well designed system because it
No.
was kind of assembled over decades. So the key question that we're posing and providing an answer to is this idea of, if we were building a social safety net today, and our goal was we want to help people when they're struggling, provide some stability and material support in a temporary way, and help them get back on their feet into work and independence, what would the system actually look like? No one in their right minds would point to exactly the system we have today and say, well, let's build this. It would be nonsensical. So the idea behind empowerment accounts is essentially saying, let's have that conversation now and talk about how to build a safety net that would be a lot simpler for families to navigate, a lot easier for states to administer, and would actually accomplish the aspirational vision of the war on poverty in a much better way, which, if you go back and read the speeches from President Johnson in the 60s when he's talking about the war on poverty, yes, there were safety net programs, but that wasn't really the point. The real point was work and independence and helping people get there. So the idea behind empowerment accounts is essentially, let's take the existing money we're already spending as a nation on social safety net programs like food stamps, the temporary assistance for needy families program that has a cash assistance program, utility assistance, childcare assistance, and let's bundle those together in essentially one monthly sort of cash benefit program to be the thing that helps provide some of that temporary stability for families and then connect it to work outcomes. That's the basic idea behind it.
Yeah, you brought up a good point. They've become so unwieldy. For example, as folks know, I spent my summers in Utah. There's a house across the street from me. They're finally tearing down, but over the years, they just kept adding rooms to it. So now they're remodeling, and they have the original structure, but they've taken off all the extra rooms, right? Because it's, a heritage classification or something. So that's you made a good description here. It's sort of what these federal policies have become. They've just become added on. It's very unwieldy. And the one complaint you hear about people say about government is it doesn't work anymore. It's not efficient. And this seems to be an efficient way to take care of those in need and helping them get a leg up to get back in society and working.
Exactly. And actually, the house point you made, it reminds me of the analogy that I often use, drawing from pop culture. For anyone who's a Harry Potter fan, if you remember in the Harry Potter books, when they go to the Weasleys' house, it describes it just like that. There's odd rooms and hallways,
Right.
And in the book, the only reason the house is still standing is because magic is like literally holding up the house. That's kind of our social safety net system on the federal level today. Now, we've done a much better job in Utah. We have to give amazing credit to our state administrators, our state legislatures and governors over the years, because we have a more integrated system than elsewhere in the country. So, and the new paper we released this week from Sutherland Institute discusses that. But there's still these challenges where families have to navigate around the country, have to navigate so many different programs. And the thing is, this often comes up as sort of a flashpoint in the welfare policy wars. We saw it last year with the debates over the One Big Beautiful Bill and the push for work requirements in Medicaid and expanding them in the food stamp program. But it shouldn't be that controversial because most Americans recognize the problems of the current social safety net, which is it's really complicated to navigate for families, and that doesn't help anyone. And it can actually at times disincentivize work and earnings. And we've done a bunch of research on that, on the issue of benefit cliffs, where someone can earn a little bit more and actually end up worse off financially because the drop in the benefit amount can outpace or sort of eat up their new earnings. And in part of our report, we surveyed voters across the nation and here in Utah. And what we found was there is very broad bipartisan majority support, in many cases supermajority support, for acknowledging that benefit cliffs and the work disincentives are a legitimate problem, that the fragmentation of the system is a legitimate problem, and actually around this idea of empowerment accounts. There's strong majority support, Republicans and Democrats, that like the idea of testing empowerment accounts as sort of, let's try streamlining these things together. It's again, majority, or in many cases, supermajority support. And often at the national level, it's actually more popular among Democrats than Republicans, even though both groups still support it significantly. So this really, I think these issues often get sort of shoehorned into the political binary, the partisanship we experience today. but it really isn't. Most American voters across the board want states to be able to innovate and streamline and combine safety net resources to test new ways of doing things. And there's a bill in Congress now that would actually do that, the Upward Mobility Act. So that's one of the things we're hopeful can move forward so we can actually try it at the state level.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, people look. I am convinced Americans want to help those in need. Okay, I'm also convinced Americans don't want you to stay needing government assistance forever. But at the end of the day, they also just want government to work. If you will go and you're able to go and do the switch to these empowerment accounts, how much money do you think could be saved by just eliminating duplication and employees you don't need? How much money do you think could be saved? What percentage?
So I don't have an exact number on that. The report doesn't get into that, but that is the concept. That's the idea behind this, is that if we can test empowerment accounts on the state level, you will have economies of scale where you can save some funds. And if you think about it, if you look at the federal apparatus where you have multiple federal agencies and everyone else, federal agencies are massive and have all kinds of offices and divisions and things like that. And those federal agencies have a hand in managing these programs. Then at the state level, we have state agencies and in many states, multiple state or local government entities managing these things. And these independent programs that, again, in Utah, we've done a better job than the rest of the nation streamlining them, but it still creates that bureaucratic burden. People call it administrative burden for the families navigating this, but I also think for the state. So the idea is if you had one assistance program, that means one caseworker, and then you can have folks in the nonprofit community involved as well, which is what our proposal envisions. So it's hard to do the math at this point. Maybe that's the next phase to say, well, here's how much money we think we could save from just less bureaucracy, not to mention a more effective way to help people get back into work and back on their feet.
That's fantastic. All right, let's talk AI. Boy, talk about a subject that people view it either with rose-colored glasses or doom and gloom. We will all die, or the world will become this enlightened, Xanadu. How should we be talking about AI? Because I see a lot of benefits. I also see there need to be guardrails. People can't just ignore it. We can't do an ostrich on this. We have to. It's happening, whether you want it to or not. So how do you think we should be discussing AI?
Yeah, I think this unfortunately falls into the same trap that most, if not all, issues do. We're sort of conditioned for this extreme binary, this partisanship, that as American voters, we've lost the civic skill set of understanding thoughtful balance and nuance on important issues like this. And with this one, the way that manifests, I think, is exactly as you said, whether it's debates over data centers or AI affecting the labor market or any of those kinds of things. Again, you seem to either have the doomers that say, this is terrible, we need to fight it, it's all bad, or the folks saying, oh, we're going to live in some, post-capitalism utopia in the future. I don't think either of those perspectives are fully right. I think the right way to look at this, and we've put out some good research from Sutherland Institute. One of our analysts here has written about some of the benefits of AI, as well as some of the ways to think about data centers appropriately. And I think the way is this: with any technological innovation that we've had in the past, we can apply the same method to AI, where we say we need to understand the benefits fully and have that be part of the conversation, and also understand some of the concerns or questions and find the right balanced approach. And so anyone who's saying that, data centers are just across the board going to destroy our civilization or our economy or our environment, we've had data centers for years. Anytime you do anything on your phone, that you use a data center. If you
credit card transaction, anything like that. I mean, as a matter of fact, what people don't understand is probably data centers are about 18% AI. The rest is all these transactions you and I are talking about.
Exactly. So data centers are nothing new. I think AI feels scary to people because there's still an unknown quantity of it, which is understandable because it's a new innovative technology. But I think, in my view, it would be if for a voter out there who's thinking, well, how do I make sense of AI and all these different facets? If you look at the data center debate, we have to look at what are the actual pieces of evidence that show what will actually reasonably happen and how can we manage data centers in an appropriate way. Some of the early concerns about water usage, newer data center technology that has closed loop systems, for example, there are technological innovations that can help address a lot of the legitimate questions or maybe even concerns that folks may have. And the same with the use of AI just in daily life, in the labor market. There's a lot of discussion right now about AI usage on college campuses and in universities. I think it's just going to be one of those things that we have to have the balanced conversation. And the way to do that as an individual is not, okay, AI is going to replace me. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to stop it. I'm going to push back against it and say, no, we can't have AI. Instead, say, how can AI help me be better at what I do best? There's a great analogy that I heard where when you're at the airport and they have those moving walkways, there are two kinds of people at the airport. There are the folks who stand on the walkway and just stand there,
Right.
and let it carry them. And there are the people who use the walkway to walk to be a lot more efficient and get to their destination faster. Now, it's not a perfect analogy. Sometimes you just need a rest. Obviously there are folks who benefit from just being able to rest for a minute while they're going to their gate. But for the analogy, I don't want to be the guy who's standing on the walkway and it's replacing me. I want to walk. And so that's how we have to think about AI. How can it help me to do better what only I can do as a human being? And sometimes I think that gets missed in the conversation.
It does. Brennan here in the studio with me, you just triggered her on the walkways, her facial expressions or something. And now I want to take her on a trip to watch her have a meltdown with some person not walking. Folks, by the way, data centers are increasingly using recycled water. And many of them, like Amazon, are using reclaimed water, which is municipalities get out of your toilets and stuff and reclaim it. So there's a lot they don't know. And this brings me up to a good point, Nick, because you're a think tank. We had a guest on earlier talking about an initiative here in Arizona, a constitutional amendment that protects military savings accounts for those who die in the line of duty or military kids. There's about 1,000 who get ESAs. And so you can't let the teachers' unions raise the account for money they don't use and so forth. And then I was talking about the teachers union here in Arizona has gone and put on the ballot a measure really to gut ESAs. The problem is they got $4 million from out of state. Okay, and I brought up the point. I said people need to know this money came from out of state, and he brought the point. Well, there's disclosures. Well, look, I do ads all the time. The disclosures, Jeremy here does them. He reads through them so fast, no one can understand it, but he does it because that's the law. And he's shaking his head. Yes, that's what he does. So I'm saying maybe there is that the money contributed from out of state. 5% of it has to go to notify people that this money came from out of state. Okay, I bring that up as an example for this. What do you think tanks and groups can do to educate people more? So, for example, I am convinced if we literally had a united effort with a bunch of think tanks and donors and did a 2-year campaign via TV, town halls on the federal budget and debt and what's it mean for your future, I think we'd probably come up with something. It won't be perfect, but I think people don't understand the problem. And I think it's the same way with these empowerment accounts you've done. It's the same thing of AI. What do you think tanks could do? You know, we all sort of talk to each other, but I think a lot of times we talk to 5%. What can we do to explain to people so they understand the pros and the cons of AI, so they understand the pros and the cons of empowerment accounts? What do you think can be done?
Yeah, I think I heard it once said that policy think tanks like Sutherland Institute, like many others, we're sort of a half step between academic research and the evening news, meaning we want to be thoughtful enough in our policy analysis and research, bringing good data and good principles to the table, but also have it feel real and relevant enough and actionable enough that it helps a legislator or a member of Congress or a staffer or a voter do their job better. And I think sometimes that's been traditionally a challenge as we move into the new media environment. A good example of this is, and I say this when we often talk to young groups of college students through Sutherland Institute, just great partnerships we have throughout Utah and the Mountain West. But I tell them, I sort of ask people to raise their hands. When's the last time you read a 20 or 30 page policy paper that was not a school assignment, just of your own volition?
Right.
Maybe like one person raises their hand. I'm like, okay, good for you, man. But I ask, when was the last time you listened to a podcast or watched a video that showed up in your feed? Everyone raises their hand. So I think the challenge, and this is something that we've been doing at Sutherland Institute, is still doing the hard work of thoughtful writing and research and those kind of the traditional white paper model of think tanks, but then realizing I have to do more to get those ideas into the hands of the actual people I want to agree with those ideas and then help them know what to do with it. And so at Sutherland Institute, a couple years ago, we launched a podcast called Defending Ideas.
Yes.
It's a weekly audio and video podcast. I get to host it for us. It's a lot of fun. It's been a great joy to do that. And the goal is really to have these kinds of conversations in a way that reach regular people to equip them. Our vision is sort of our audience, as a result of listening or watching one of our shows, we want them to feel like, you know what? I can go talk to my crazy uncle or my super liberal coworker or my whatever, and I'm better equipped to actually talk about these issues and ideas in a way that is principled, in a way that is persuasive, and also in a way that can turn down the political temperature a little bit. As Arthur Brooks has said, no one in history has ever been insulted into agreeing with you. But if we can discuss and debate in love and respect, backed by principles and good evidence, that's going to solve a lot of our issues. And I think it gets to what you're saying, is that if we can do that, and if more think tanks can do that, which of course takes more funding, I've often thought, well, how do we translate? A ton of money goes into the political system, political campaigns, but you need to have some of that money come to think tanks as well, because we're doing the policy work after folks get elected. But I think there is a need for a lot more of that, because we've forgotten as a country how to have these civic conversations. I think think tanks are uniquely positioned to revive that lost civic art of true debate and persuasion, multimedia, like Defending Ideas, like what you guys do with Breaking Battlegrounds, but still doing it in a way that it's not just the dopamine hits of the short scrolls. We have some of that, but the thoughtful conversations, I think, is what's needed.
Well, as you were telling me about your 20, 30-page report, when a think tank puts out a 20, 30-page report and you have your board and your donors and your staff, what percentage do you think actually read the 20, 30-page report that they all worked on?
Right. Well, I mean,
right?
the one that I just wrote on empowerment accounts, it's only 21 pages. Maybe it's a little. So yes, everyone, please go read it. But no, I don't have any illusions that a lot of people are reading this stuff.
I know,
and that's sad for me as a think tank guy.
I know.
But it's sort of, there was actually a lot of news coverage recently about sort of the death of reading, people reading books a lot less. So I would say we meaning conservatives, policy folks, think tanks, media outfits, we all need to do two things simultaneously. Number one, still protect and preserve and promote the idea of long form reading, whether it is essays or reports or books, as a fundamentally good thing, and not lose that, while also adapting to, we need to be having these conversations in multimedia formats like this, that if I write a 20-page report on some wonky welfare policy thing, and then if I can't come and explain it to you in a way that your average audience member is going to say, oh, that makes sense, then we're doing something wrong.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, Nick Dunn, how do people follow your podcast, first of all?
Yeah, find us anywhere you get your shows. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. We're on all the major platforms. You can just search for Defending Ideas and hit subscribe, or find our website at defendingideas.org.
And Nick, as you said, the podcast brings you joy. We hope you had joy coming on our show today, and we hope to have you back on in the future.
It would be my pleasure. Thanks so much. It's been great.
You're welcome. Appreciate it. Thank you. Folks, this is Breaking Battlegrounds. You can follow us on breakingbattlegrounds.vote. You can follow us on Substack. And Brendan's giving me the stink eye. Give us a 5-star rating. And if you don't, ignore everything I've said. But 5-star only. And again, visit us. You can sign up for Substack. And you can get us wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on YouTube. I don't care if you watch the YouTube. But, 5-star rating. That's what we're asking for. Have a great weekend. And pray Brendan does not get behind somebody slow on a walkway at the airport. We'll be back next week. Take care.